I'm going for Max Vocal Fry.
Oh, hey guys.
I didn't drink any water yesterday just for this.
Hello everyone, welcome back.
Hello. Revisiting our vocal fry topic briefly.
We didn't have enough to say the first time, and clearly the conversation has evolved since then.
I have like a funny, very short story to share. So I have a coworker who has like pretty hardcore vocal fry, and they answered the phone and then spoke in a completely clean voice. It was one of those, I mean, I don't know if you know anyone who has like a clear phone voice.
Yes.
But it made me laugh. I didn't say anything, but it's interesting because it's clearly something that on some level they know about and are in full control of.
One of my coworkers has her normal voice that she uses when she's talking to anybody in the office, but whenever somebody external calls in and she has to answer, it's oh hello, and it's like this really bright chipper voice, and we're like, why do they do you not like us? So we always make fun of her for it.
It makes me think of the woman in Office Space who's answering the phone.
Please hold.
I think there is something.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I was thinking. No, that is Office Space.
Yeah, there's that. I'm trying to remember what she's saying.
Just a moment.
That's it. That's the line.
What a great movie.
I think there is a good reason for having different voices for different occasions, especially when one of the differences between those occasions is that people can't see you anymore. And I'm not saying that this is what your coworkers are doing, but it's something that me and a guy here where I work, we're talking about for podcasting, is you have to, if you want to convey things just through voice, that's different than talking to someone face to face where you've got all those other nonverbal cues. And so your ability to emote more simply through tone and speed and all sorts of other things with your voice is a valuable skill. And it's harder than it sounds to do it really well. Again, not what your coworkers are doing most likely, but there is something to it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, but that's not what my coworkers are doing.
No.
Checkmate.
I
take your point about if a lot of communication is nonverbal, then if you're put in a situation where all of the communication is verbal, then maybe there's some advantage to being more expressive. But
I will say, I think that. Sorry, I cut you off.
But what I was going to say was, it's still funny, and so I shared the story on the podcast.
Yeah, I think that you've heard 100 numbers throughout your life of 90% of communication is nonverbal, 80%, whatever. One of the things that I think is misleading about that is I think what the original intent was with saying that is 90% of communication happens outside of strictly the words and what order you put them in. Again, even something as simple as pitching a question at the end, a sentence at the end to turn it into a question. I think in the context of that original number, that is considered nonverbal because it's not the word, it's how you said it. So I think that when a lot of people hear that, though, what they're hearing is it's body language or something like that. Like that's the rest of it, and 90% of your communication is that. And I don't think that's what's actually. I don't think that's where that number actually comes from.
Well, here's my rebuttal. Sometimes I challenge myself by when I'm on a Microsoft Teams meeting, I turn my computer speakers off and I just look at the video that a couple of people keep turned on, and I try to I'll only write down action items and things like that based on what I'm getting out of those visuals, and I haven't been fired yet.
Just as I got a couple of things. First of all, interesting that if only a couple of people have the video turned on, then in theory it's not a requirement. So it's interesting that anybody does it. I know at our company we never have video turned on, and
some of us are exhibitionists.
Oh, I see. Also, kind of an admin note. Shepard had me adjust some of my mic settings last night because there was some weirdness on his end for when he was doing the editing. And you may regret that decision. My little tummy rumbled twice in the last 5 minutes, and it's some fat waveforms that you're gonna have to edit out. There's there's a lot of stuff that's going on that's not me talking that is going to get captured now that was not previously.
Well, one thing that we never do while we're doing this podcast that we totally could is if some noise happens while you're talking, do another take. Just start whatever that sentence was over and keep going.
Well, in this case, that's not what was happening. Other people were talking. I still had my mic on. I hadn't muted myself, and then my stomach went.
And well, then that will not be a problem.
Yeah. But anyway, on the topic of types of communication and what's viable based on the medium, verbal versus nonverbal, I saw something interesting the other day, and I'll try to dig up what I was looking at and link if I can find it. But I don't have a ton of interest in theater, like live performances. And one of the things that I have one of the things that's kept me away from it is what I viewed as overacting on the parts of the actors who were on the stage. It's all these like big movements, super dramatic, just making much larger sweeping physical movements than would be realistic for what's actually happening if it were happening in real life. And I always wondered why they did it, what the stylistic reasoning behind it was. And it's really obvious, and I don't know how I didn't see it before. Somebody pointed out that if you're watching a movie, in a lot of cases, the action is, even if you're, sitting in a theater and you're pretty far away from the screen, the image is blown up pretty big. And so you're basically seeing it the size that it would be if you were pretty close to the conversation. And so if somebody raises an eyebrow or just like swallows nervously or tilts their head slightly or stands up just a little bit straighter, that's something that you can see. You can notice it very easily because you're standing right there. But for a stage performance, they have to make all of their movements big enough that the person standing 200 feet away in the audience will be able to clearly see what's happening and will be able to get the emotion out of the motion that you're making. And so they have to act big because the furthest person away is a lot further, practically speaking, on stage than it is if you're watching a movie. Super obvious once it was pointed out, and it doesn't make me like the stage acting anymore, but I understand why it's happening, and I thought it was interesting.
For you young kids out there, that's where the term emoting comes from. It refers to that sort of grand overacting of an emotion or something like that. So when you're playing Fortnite and you can check your emotes, that's where that term comes from.
Orange Justice or whatever.
Yeah, I think theater's really annoying.
Yeah. That opinion has not changed. I just understand why it's happening now.
I'm going to go one step further. I also don't like musicals of any kind. I generally don't like comedies, and I especially dislike musical comedy.
I have not seen too many musicals, but I've seen Phantom of the Opera, and I'm pretty familiar with the soundtrack from Hamilton, and I've enjoyed both of those. Phantom of the Opera's got a lot of issues. I don't think that play would get made today. There's a lot to dislike about the narrative, but the music's pretty damn catchy.
I do enjoy plays, opera, and musicals. I think they're pretty fun, assuming, of course, that they're good.
Yeah, it's one of those things that not only do I not like it, but I also don't like people who do.
Oh.
Yeah, none of this surprises me.
Yeah, so we'll end the episode there.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that gets me about me personally, like, if I had to pick between a movie and a play or a musical or whatever, like a live performance of something, then not only would I just generally prefer the movie because it allows for more subtle acting and a more curated experience and tends to be, I think, higher quality, It's also way more convenient. I feel like for me at least, going to a play, I am going to see what is, to my mind, a worse product, and it's going to be more annoying to even get there, because there's a lot more, obviously, showings of a movie where it's pre-recorded, and they can even have overlapping showings at multiple venues, than a play where there's going to be one of them at a time. So, for me, the cost-benefit just isn't there for plays.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an interesting angle, and I think I'm... Like, on the one hand, I want to really like live music, but I don't usually.
I'm with you.
And so I recently went to a concert with some friends of mine, like something big enough that we traveled to go see it, and it was like very well done. I think as concerts go, and I've been to my fair share, it was good. That being said, I think it was an objectively worse music listening experience than sitting down with a nice pair of headphones and listening to the album. Like, there's something fundamentally silly about getting right in front of the band and then putting in earplugs to listen to their music, and having the singer largely blocked by those earplugs because they've amplified the drums so much that if you don't put them in, you'll be deafened. I don't know. I've always, like, I understand why that is the way that it is, but it's also silly.
I agree with that. I also, even disregarding the, obviously a studio recording environment is going to be set up for the best acoustics that could be reasonably achieved by that studio, and they're going to try for a concert, but they're not going to reach that same level, obviously. Otherwise, studio albums would be recorded at concert venues, and they aren't typically. Yeah. But in addition to that, if you're at a live concert, you're probably going to have a bunch of people packed next to you screaming the whole time and waving their phones around, which, at least for me, does not add to the experience. For other people, it might.
Well, this was kind of interesting. So I went to a Tool concert, and it was, I mean, the band was fantastic, and seemed very on point. They were playing really well, and their shows are famously visual. There are all these big screens behind them, and then there's smoke and lasers and all kinds of crazy effects and stuff like that. And that was all cool. That all added to the experience. But from an audio standpoint, it suffered because I had fucking earplugs in, and we were in like a stadium. So there is a trade there. And to address the phone thing, they are famously very protective of their performances. And so,
good.
Video was not allowed at the venue. And they had an army of people standing around. And I saw one guy tried to take his phone out to video one of the songs. And as soon as the phone came up, a dude standing in front of that section of the audience, just blasts the dude in the face with a really bright flashlight. He gets swarmed and then taken out.
Nice.
There really were no phones, which I thought was impressive. It took a lot of people to enforce that policy, but it appears that they really did. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because this is one where I want to like it, and I just don't like it that much.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that. So one of the things that a lot of people talk about when they talk about live performances is the performance angle of it. So right now, Beyonce is somewhat famous for her live performances being this pretty extravagant, or not extravagant. It's the concert that she puts on is a lot more than her music, sort of like what you were talking about with Tool, where it's got Occasionally there will just be new stuff there, but then it's also just the way that she does her shows. It's something beyond what you can get when you're listening to her CD at home in terms of the entire experience. To your point, yeah, if you're going for a straight up which is better audio, then yeah, you would hope that their deliberately engineered album would be superior. But that's, for a lot of people, what separates the good live shows from the bad ones, is how much more do they add to the experience of listening to their music when you're at the show.
Which is totally fair. It's just, for me, I think it's not only is the overall effect a net negative, it's also way more inconvenient. But obviously that calculus will work out different for different people.
And there's a kind of a weird hybrid, which is, what about live albums? Or
those
like
get
DVDs.
deleted.
What do you mean?
Like like I don't have a single live album in my music collection. If I see a music collection and I'm like, oh, this artist, I'll buy all of their stuff, and then I'll go through and I'll make sure, okay, are there any live albums in here? Let me get rid of that. I have no interest in listening to the live album because it's just a worse version. Because, to the point of all the visual enhancements, obviously you're not going to get any of that. It's just...
Well, I'm talking about two things here. Point taken about a live audio album, but mini live albums, are DVDs or Blu-rays where it's a, it's video of the performance, and it's one of those weird cases where, I think it's very tempting when you like something or you don't like something or you just generally feel a particular way about anything, that it must be like a computer program, and you can zoom in closely enough on inputs or logic or something like that, and it's all going to connect together in some kind of way that makes sense to you. And that's just not how taste works. It seems like I shouldn't like live albums or videos of live performances, but I often do.
Yeah, I think one good example of that, or not a good example of that, one thing to consider when thinking about a live album is that you are getting a different performance of a song. So they chose to do it one way for the studio, and then it'll generally, by and large, be similar for live, but things will inevitably change. One of the best examples, and Duncan, I seem to remember you being a fan of this as well, is S&M by Metallica, where the way James Hetfield sings when he's on a live stage is generally a little different than the way he sings when he's in a studio. And I happen to prefer his live voice better. It's smoother, it's a little less growly. Yeah. He's got a really incredible voice, and so the performance that he gives on stage is fundamentally different, and I think superior. Now, they could choose to just record it that way as well, but what it means is that listening to Fuel or whatever on the CD and listening to it on S&M it's different. Plus, they also have a Philharmonic with them when they do the live show. But, there are a lot of adjustments that people make when they do their live performances that makes them different, and sometimes you might find that you like it better.
Well, the example I'll give is one of my favorite albums ever is the Porcupine Tree album, Fear of a Blank Planet. And there's a live performance. I think maybe the whole video is 2.5 hours long, and it's most, if not all, of that album and a few other earlier albums. You can look up this video on YouTube. It's called Anesthetize, and it's a really, really great live performance, but it's a case where the way they mic'd it for the recording is so good, and then it was mixed so well after the fact that you could shut the video off and just listen to it, and it's very high quality. So one of the things that's shitty about live albums a lot of the time is they sound bad. It's not properly in stereo, or things are washed out, or they don't fade the crowd noise right, so there's just this low roar at the bottom the whole time. That's not how this performance is. And so to your point, Shepard, it's it feels like a kind of parallel universe performance of it. Like it's different. Some of the like the songs have evolved over time, and so that's a little different. The way that it's played in some cases is different, but it still sounds awesome. And if you're watching the video, there's this visual component to it that you wouldn't have ordinarily. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
I think there's something also to be said for the environmental changes that you experience when you're in a crowd of people versus alone. As an example, I think if you're watching a comedy film, a lot of times the superior experience for watching one is, again, for my own taste, in a crowded theater with a bunch of other people laughing. That enhances that experience for me. I made the mistake one time of watching a comedy in a theater, not exactly alone, but with very few people in it, because it was like the middle of the day, several weeks after it came out. And there was one guy at one point who went like, "Ha!" and then embarrassed stopped laughing. And so nobody was laughing the entire time during this comedy film. It was just like awkward to do so, and it felt weird. Whereas if you're in a Friday night crowd of people when the movie comes out, people are dying all around you laughing at this thing. And so that audience interaction can change the experience in a way that sometimes might be negative or sometimes might be positive, but it's something to consider when you're figuring out what the best way for you to experience some form of media is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that is a problem I don't have as a Sigma male, because I don't look to others for social cues.
Pretty strong stance.
Yeah.
Changing
But
tax.
I'm too busy grinding to see movies.
Yeah, I'm already up. You mentioned in passing when you were talking about ways to see live concerts, Blu-ray releases. So I'm going to talk about Blu-rays again. I got the 15-disc Lord of the Rings original trilogy extended edition, and I ordered it and was wondering how do we get 15 discs out of this? Blu-rays are pretty high capacity.
Yeah.
So it's weird that 3 movies, even if they're pretty long movies, would require 15 discs. But I got it, and it is, for each movie, basically 3 discs of special features, and then the movies take up 2 discs. And I don't feel like that was necessary. I'm almost positive that they would have been able to fit each movie onto its own disc, and I'm almost wondering if they just took the DVD release, which probably did require 2 discs per movie, and they just took everything that was on the disc 1 for Fellowship of the Ring, made sure it was all the HD content, put that on a Blu-ray disc, and then regardless of how much capacity they had left over, did the same thing with the second disc and the third disc and so on.
Right.
Just
I wonder if what they did was basically take the master quality stuff and make the cuts for the DVDs. And so they, it was already cut, and then they downscaled for the DVD, and now they're just not downscaling. I
fully expect the Blu-ray experience per disc to be basically the DVD experience, but upscaled and with, better menus because it's Blu-ray instead of DVD.
Well, what's the capacity of a Blu-ray? Like 25 gigs?
It's 25 gigs unless it's a dual layer, and then it's 50. It's 50 gigs per layer, and I don't think you can get a triple layer disc.
Or 25.
25 per layer.
Yeah.
Which, even Lord of the Rings is not going to be 50 gigs per movie, I don't think.
Yeah. I would disagree with that estimation. I think it very, very well could be much higher than that. So, as an example, our 1080p MP4s, so for one that's like an hour and change long, which is not that long. Here, I'm going to open one here and see how big it is. So like session 11, which is an hour and 4 minutes long, 1080p, 30 frames, 7 gigabytes. So when you consider that let's take the first extended edition film, that's like, almost 4 hours long at 4K? I think you could very easily exceed 25 gigs with that.
Yeah, actually, you know what? You are correct, and I am wrong. Fellowship of the Ring in the extended edition is using Oh, interesting. There's a Blu-ray disc that has 100 gigabyte capacity. I didn't know about this. But the first half of the extended edition is 67.4 gigabytes. So even with a 100 gig disc, you would have to split it out. That's insane. 100 gig disc, no kidding. But I'm very excited to watch those movies again. It's been a while, and I suspect they hold up pretty well because a lot of the effects were practical effects. And so much love and care went into all the props and the armor and such, and all the actors are great. What a great trilogy of movies.
It's definitely kind of a test, like a compatibility test for me from a movie taste standpoint. Because I know people, and I'm sure you guys do, that can't watch The Fellowship of the Ring because it's too boring.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the same people who think Master and Commander is a bad movie because it's too boring. But all you can do is weep for them.
I've never seen Master and Commander.
Yeah, those same people probably weep at you, or weep for you when they find out that you're turned off by entire genres like plays and operas.
I would argue that those aren't genres.
It's an entire medium.
Yeah. Normally you would correct me on that, so I'm trying to back you up.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, they might, but I weep for them for being wrong.
I also got the first 6 Star Wars movies on Blu-ray, and I don't know if it's going to be the, George Lucas reimagining with the extra rocks, or if it's going to be, I don't know what version I'm getting, but...
Yeah. I haven't seen a Star Wars movie in a long time.
Yeah, I want to go back and watch at least the original trilogy again, just for the nostalgia.
Yeah, I should do that at some point.
End up here, we can watch it on Blu-ray in stunning HD.
I don't know. I'm trying to read more, and I'm listening to a lot more audiobooks these days.
I'm about to be on the road for a while, and I'm planning on at least getting further. Well, I have the Lord of the Rings audiobooks narrated by Andy Serkis, which are fantastic, but I'm also trying to finish out the best audiobook that's ever been made, Garth Marenghi's Terror Tome.
Just an immortal classic. Yeah. My book situation has gotten out of control. I, like many other people, just buy books at a much more aggressive pace than I actually read them. And I'm trying to maybe not pump, but at least tap the brakes on the book purchasing and try to get caught up on reading them.
I have found that my book hoarding has gotten a lot worse since, it used to be if you wanted a book, you had to go buy a physical copy. These days, I will buy physical copies of books that I really like, but if I just want to try something else, and try something new, and I've never heard of it before, but, whatever, I'll just give it a shot. I can buy the whole series, if there's a deal on it, and just download it onto my e-reader. And so the amount of bloat in my backlog is way higher than it would have been 10 years ago. Just because it's so easy it doesn't take up shelf space. It's not clutter. It's not an eyesore. And so you don't I'll just buy that and maybe I'll read it later.
I have really mixed feelings about the ebook thing. There's no denying the convenience. And if you are going to be traveling a lot or are otherwise in some situation where space is at a premium, I get it, and I have a lot of ebooks for that reason. But I tend to read books and then lend them to people or give them to people, and that's out if it's an ebook. I know some e-readers have some kind of sharing function, but in practice I've never used it, and I don't know anyone who's ever talked to me about using it. And then there's just I like holding a book. I am an animal who tends to write in books and stuff pieces of paper inside books and stuff like that. So I don't know. It's interesting. I say I've started a book club, but really we met once, and then we've been really struggling to nail down a time to meet a second time. And on the one hand, it's really nice in a situation like that to have the book in a searchable format. But on the other hand, it's one of those like attention situations where I really don't want to show up to something like that and then have my phone in front of me the whole time, even if I'm using it to facilitate the conversation. Like there's something I like just having like a physical book with bookmarks in it, or like post-it notes or something like that.
Speaking of having stuff stuffed into a book, one thing that I really need to finish at some point, because I've had now 2 abortive attempts, is the S thing, or Ship of Theseus, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Because I was enjoying it both times, and then it's not the kind of thing that you can put down for an extended period of time and then pick up later.
No, I think you really need to spend a weekend with it.
Yeah, I'm hoping I can do that coming up after this trip I'm taking. I should have some kind of just time hanging out, and that is one of the things on my list, in addition to watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Oh my god! In addition to watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Well, if you're interested in that idea, which for anyone listening who's not familiar, S is it's a project between 2 people. J.J. Abrams is one of them, and I can't remember the name of the author that he worked with.
It's Doug Dorst, I think. I'll look it up.
That sounds right to me, but I won't spoil it.
It is Doug Dorst.
It's this weird, it looks like a library book, and it's full of scribblings in the margins and underlined stuff and pieces of paper and photos and postcards and stuff like that tucked into the book. And there are just different layers of story there. It's like both a book and a story about people using that book to communicate with each other. It's really, really interesting, but it's something you have to reread several times from several different perspectives to understand.
It's also not something that you can read casually. Like this is going to be the thing that you're doing. You need to be pretty locked into the experience in order to actually like get anything out of it.
I think it's awesome. And I mean, it is one of those things where I like the idea better than I like the execution of the idea, but the execution's still pretty good, and it's fascinating. And years ago when I read it, it got me interested in reading again. If you are interested in that concept but you don't have as much time,
Pale Fire. You gonna talk about Pale Fire again?
I really like Pale Fire.
That and House of Leaves. That's like the trifecta, and I would like to read all 3 of them, but I want to start with S because I've tried to read it twice now.
Yeah.
Everybody loves Nabokov.
Well, and I don't know what else from Nabokov has been made into a movie other than Lolita, but I'm a big Stanley Kubrick fan, and Well,
I'm a Lolita, so...
I thought Lolita was very well done. The movie adaptation of the book.
A lot of links in this episode.
Oh, has anyone seen Napoleon?
I have not, nor do I plan to.
Is that a new movie?
Yeah.
Oh. No, I haven't even heard of it.
I'm considering going to see it today. It's Joaquin Phoenix.
Oh, okay.
I haven't really read anything about it, so I don't know what the critics are saying. But I may overcome my dislike of going to the movie theater to go see it because I don't want to wait for it to come out on streaming.
A couple of my buddies were really excited to go see it. They were talking about it a while back when the trailer came out. It's directed by Ridley Scott, who I didn't know was still alive. You may know him from Blade Runner. Mm-hmm. But, I don't know. It didn't really look particularly interesting to me. I'm also not a big history buff in the sense that I had a friend a while back who was really into, in fact, Napoleonic history in particular. He found that to be like found the guy to be an interesting historical figure, and I have no particular interest in it. So, I don't know. It doesn't capture my interest. I'm not curious about it, and what my friends here IRL said was not super positive, so I'm not going out of my way to check it out.
No, I mean, if it was a musical or a comedy, I would have been there already.
You know what
Maybe
else
it
I
should
would
have
kind of like to see? Maybe this will be the next. I need to be careful to avoid the same problem we were just talking about with books, where you just buy a bunch of stuff and then never watch it, I guess, with Blu-rays. But what I'd like to go back and do is the... and there goes the trucks. We'll see how well that gets picked up. What I'd like to go back and do is watch Pirates of the Caribbean. Especially the first movie is so good. But just the first three, I don't even know how many there are these days, but Dead Man's Chest and At World's End are also great movies. And I think it'd be fun to watch them again.
My experience with them is that the first one does indeed hold up quite well. And then the other two are, there are elements of it that are really great. The visual effects are still quite striking and look really good to this day. But the story for the first one is really tight, and then the other ones just get kind of weird. That was my experience on rewatching them. But
yeah,
the first one, at the very least, is still a borderline flawless film. It's very good.
Yeah, and what a soundtrack.
Yeah, my boy Hans Zimmer. Yeah, iconic.
But that's definitely a series that seems to be going on way longer than it maybe should have. I stopped keeping up with it, so for all I know, maybe it was good. But from what I heard, it wasn't. And it was just sort of, it was a zombie franchise.
Yeah, I watched the fourth one. My recollection is that there are 5. I didn't like the fourth one. I didn't think it was particularly good. Or rather, it didn't match my tastes. I'm sure there are people who liked it, but yeah, it definitely felt like they were trying to keep something alive far past the point where it would have been better to just let it end. Trying to trade off the IP or something, but I didn't watch the 5th one. I heard it wasn't very good. I'm not particularly curious to verify.
Yeah, I think I only saw the first 3.
Yeah, that was so apparently, yeah, there are only 5. I thought there were more, but I would definitely sort of segment the movies into the first 3 kind of told a story. It I guess, completed the cycle on Will Turner, and then I don't really know what happened with the other 2.
Yeah, one of the things that I think that as a trilogy suffers from is the first film ends and in a way that invites further adventure, but does not leave you asking a lot of questions. It is complete. And so then the first film is in some ways very disconnected from the second 2 films. With all the Davy Jones stuff and everything else, and the East India Trading Company. That stuff is only in the second and third films that are inspired by the first film, but it's a trilogy in the sense that it is 3 films, but narratively speaking, I don't think that it fits that mold very well, because I don't think that the first film was supposed to be followed up by anything else until it was very successful and popular, and then they decided to craft a story out of it. So I think that's one of the narrative structural components of those 3 films that is more obvious when you go back and watch them again.
Yeah, maybe. At an absolute minimum, I want to watch the first one again, because that's just a banger of a movie.
Yeah, definitely a worthwhile watch. There's a good YouTube video. It's like an hour or 2 long, I think, but it's sort of a video essay on the accidental genius of the first Pirates film. The title is something very similar to that. And it talks about some of the things that were going into the production and some of the ideas that they were talking about that ended up changing for the better. One of the classic examples is Johnny Depp's interpretation of what a pirate would be. He was supposed to not be that big a character, I think, in the film. And then Johnny Depp wanted to make... he based the way that Jack Sparrow acted on rock stars, and in particular Rolling Stones, Mick Jagger, and I can't remember. Slightly embarrassing, but anyway, just he was thinking, hey, pirates are the rock stars of their day, and so acting like that, he's maybe a little high a lot of the time, and things of that nature that brought a lot more character to that character. And they started kind of reworking the film to incorporate his character more, and it ended up being obviously like the lasting legacy of those films is the character of Jack Sparrow more than anything else. So it's interesting to see somebody take that look at it now with a little more context and a little more look at the history and see what is it that made that film the way it was. I'll post that link somewhere.
No, I already found it. It's in the link.
Great.
What you guys don't realize is this Delta Green campaign is actually a sequel to Tomb of Annihilation.
Oh, wow.
And that the monster that you saw in the jungle, the dinosaur, was actually one of the dinosaurs of Chult.
Steel Garden?
Yeah. So
One day we're going to fight Steel Garden. I'll make sure of it.
We'll talk after, but I'm going to be involved in a game that Duncan's playing, and maybe I can play Steel Garden.
maybe. I think you're about to find out just how difficult it is, or like how slowly the plot moves at a game like this.
Just because people are so cautious because it's DCC and their characters will like die if they stub their toe, or
No, I think it's more because it's mostly newer players. There are more players than you're accustomed to playing with, and will effectively only play for 2 hours.
oh, okay, yeah.
So, put that together. Like by the time we're done recapping, it'll be a 2 hour window, and so it's going to be 5 or 6 people plus the DM. With 2 hours to advance like a relatively complicated plot. And this particular group loves to plan, and they really like logistics. So there's a lot of sitting around, kind of conjecturing.
Honestly, that's some of the best fun you can have in the tabletop game, though, is spending 5 hours figuring out how you're going to open the door.
Oh, I'm not mad at it, but my point is the idea that you could do what you're describing, like have put a side quest into a single session, is just not doable.
Okay.
It is funny, I think, to compare different game types and different game sizes. If you're playing a DCC or some similar game type with a bunch of people, yeah, it's going to generally take longer to get anything done, but that thing or that list of things that you could conceivably achieve with that group is bigger because you have more people and more abilities. Compare that to something like 2 people or 2 players in a Delta Green campaign. Those 2 characters can't achieve quite as much in terms of the greatness of any individual feat, but
Right.
you
Or in
can
your
get
case,
through,
really nothing at all.
but you can get through whatever those things are that you do get through way faster. And then just game system wise, how long does it take to get through certain encounters, and what kind of encounters will you expect to see? I've talked about it before with this campaign where the average episode length is an hour 15, hour 20, something like that. But there's a lot of episode in each of those episodes. Like there are a lot of different scenes of things happening. Compare that to the downtimes that I've been running, where the average length is more like 2.5 hours, and not much more will end up happening because 50 seconds, one combat will get extended to be an hour long as you're playing it, and so not as much story happens, even though it takes twice as long to get through it.
Yeah. I mean, there's that, and then another thing I have to contend with is combat will. A given combat encounter will take a full session, maybe more. And many players want to have as much combat as possible, or at least regular combat. But when I present them clear combat opportunities, they very deliberately avoid them. So it's an interesting problem to tackle from a like serving up a dish that the players want to eat standpoint. And it's like I know they want to eat it, but if I put it in front of them, they'll turn their nose up at it, and to some degree, they want to be held down, and they want me to force that food into their mouths.
I think part of it is, especially when it comes to starting a combat, players will often try to engineer the best possible start to that combat, some way to do some sort of really effective ambush that will tip the scales in their favor before the thing's even started. And so, again, I haven't played at this table in particular, but I think that kind of thing can happen often enough that it can feel like it's time to fight. Why aren't they fighting? And they're just trying to engineer this perfect situation before they go in, and it can end up taking much longer than maybe it needs to.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's also true that it's another case of the players don't really want what they want. Ask a player if they want a magic weapon that'll just automatically kill anything it touches, and they'll say yes. And then watch the game stop being fun after that. So, I'm getting better at using compelling storytelling to have them decide that, we need to fight, and maybe there's some sense of urgency that prevents us from exquisite several sessions of planning before we fight. Like, we just have to jump in and do it right now.
Yeah, I think that can be tough because I think it's difficult to maintain that balance between trying to make sure that the players have the power, and then trying to get them to actually move through the plot, or move forward to give you something else to give them, and that can be a tough balance to strike sometimes.
Man, this is it's something that's come up a lot when Roland and I have discussed running Delta Green campaigns, where it's very common to have players that are hyper cautious, and so how do you get them to engage with the story when the game is inherently dangerous? And so, how can you do things like apply time pressure or make the situation more urgent without it seeming too artificial, and with avoiding the burn it down problem? And like normally in my Delta Green one-shots, I really put the pressure on, and that's been a big difference for this campaign where it's comparatively extremely slow. Of course, that's all going to change this session.
Tarrasque's going to drop in.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
A big purple worm.
Oh, no. Shepard, it sounded like you had something to say.
I was just going to say, I think it can be a question of carrots and sticks. It's one of the tropes of old school TTRPGs, again, of the adventurers walking through everything with a 10-foot pole, poking and touching everything, and, they won't go through the tavern door without checking it for traps, because experience has taught them that the second they don't do that, it'll have a delayed blast fireball or whatever. So, what have they experienced, and is it any fun for them to dive headfirst into something? And obviously I'm kind of painting with broad strokes here and coloring these with extremes as well, but why would they want to approach things with speed without the prompt of time pressure? Has that ever benefited them? And we've talked about it before sort of recently of how do you incentivize certain things, and it's tough, and different crowds are going to react differently to different situations. So it's difficult.
That's why starting this session, I have a policy of just now you can push as hard as you want. Tim's staying put. He will take no initiative. He will take no action.
Nice.
He's had his fun.
And you're saying that that's different than what we've been doing?
Yes.
Hey, Tim's the go-getter.
Tim does stuff.
Simon is the player of no.
This is true. Which is crazy because he's not even a player.
I mean, that's for sure.